Well, good evening. Welcome, Element Church. Thank you so much for joining us during our midweek connection, and thankful to have Cameron here again as we just kind of recap what we talked about on Sunday, provide some more just thought-provoking ideas and good discussion questions for you guys to discuss in your groups. And if you're not a part of a group here at Element Church, we would love to invite you to join us tonight, 6:30 on Zoom. And so whether you're watching this live on Facebook or on our church online platform, the link to that Zoom meeting is going to be shared right there. So then you can click on it at 6:30, jump in, and we're going to talk about how life is going and some of these discussion questions together. And it's just a great way to connect in the middle of the week. And so this Sunday was Easter, and we started a new series. And this new series built off of where do you find your identity? And we started by asking this question, how would you fill in the blank? I am blank. And just teased that out for a little bit and talked about different ways we might fill that out, fill that in, and really what God has called us to be and how we should fill that in light of the gospel.
Yeah, and you had a great point that answer can change throughout time, right?
For sure.
Not only do stages of life, but just what you're going through at certain circumstances, even today. But we want to start that as a discussion question for you guys. So how would you fill in the blank after I am what? What is it that comes to mind when you think of that in terms of your identity?
Yeah.
Adam, what do you see as common endings to that? Common things people put in that spot?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, probably the most common way to fill that blank in is based off what you do.
Yes.
So, like, are you an accountant? Or are you a blue collar, white collar worker? Are you a student? Are you a stay-at-home parent? Like, however, a lot of times I think we naturally tend to answer it that way. And that's even like common ways of like interacting with people for the first time. Like you meet someone new, you're like, hi, what's your name? And we don't say, what are you? But we say, what do you do? I mean, that's just like that natural, and it's, I think so many of us, we tie our identity to what we do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, and I think it partially stems out of that just natural conversation.
Sure.
But also, we spend so much time doing it that we seem to think that's the value we bring to the world, therefore that is what I am.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, at a deeper level, some of the common answers that we get that really challenge Christianity are fall into like two camps, right? That I think maybe are a little bit more dangerous than when we think about identifying ourselves with our jobs. But when we answer the question, I am good, some people, I think there's two answers, right? Either I am good or I am really bad.
Yeah.
I am too good, I'm good. I don't need the cross. I don't need Jesus. I don't need help. I'm a good person overall, right? If we had to draw the line, I'm getting into heaven because I'm a pretty good dude. Or on the flip side, I'm a terrible person. Nobody could love me enough to die for me or to save me or to do anything. I'm not worthy of any of that. And I think those are some dangerous things that get floated in culture.
Sure. Yeah.
But like you said, there's a lot of times that when we tie ourselves to those identities, whether it's a job, whether it's a hobby or whatever it is, that those can be disrupted, right? And that leads to problems in our identity, causes some concern. And you had this great line in there that when we turn to Christ, right, when we put our identity in Christ, we are shifting from not something that's going to be pain and suffering free, but to something that is pain and suffering proof. Our identity will be pain and suffering proof, which is just a great line. Can you unpack that for us? Tease that out.
Yeah, well, I think there are certain circles of Christianity where people have sold a bill of goods that isn't true. And it's this idea that like, if you have enough faith, then bad things won't happen to you. Like you won't ever lose your job. You won't ever get sick. You won't ever have, run into whatever bad situations. And that is definitely not what the Bible teaches. Following Jesus is not, you're not signing up for a life that's pain and suffering free. But it is this idea that we're signing up to a life that's pain and suffering proof, meaning that pain and suffering don't have to define us anymore. And don't have to change our identity. And that's, a lot of that we saw this Sunday looking at that 1 Corinthians chapter 15 passage where Paul starts off talking about the resurrection, exactly what we were celebrating on Easter, talking about its significance in different people's lives. And then he comes to himself and he's like, and then the person who deserved it least of all Jesus appeared to me.
Yeah.
And then he says this line in verse 10, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And so we see that Paul ties his identity to the resurrection of Jesus and the grace of God. And what that does is when you tie your identity there, then pain, suffering, circumstances don't have to change who you are.
Yes.
Like if your identity is tied to the grace of God and the resurrection of Jesus, those realities don't change. And so then you get that security and don't have to be at the whims of whatever happens to you.
Yeah. No, and I think you bring up a great point that the early apostles, are perfect depictions of this. I mean,
Sure.
they did not live a pain and suffering free life. Paul especially was beaten and he's running around, and yet they still stand and boldly proclaim and have that peace within them.
That's right.
That isn't shattered by that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any concept for Christianity that you have, if like Paul, the apostles, Jesus himself
Don't
like
fit into
don't
it.
fit, they don't qualify, then
Might have gone wrong somewhere.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, at this point though, we wanted to open it to you guys, right? Because I think this is, we don't talk about it as much sometimes, but it can be a very great faith builder for everybody else when you chat about the times where you had a really tough season of life, right? Where there's something came, the storms of life came, and it was a struggle, but then there was just this natural calm or this presence of the Lord that was walking with you during those times that really, got you through it. And so I think it's always encouraging if anybody is open to sharing those times in life where you've gone through, a rough season, rough patch or whatever, but the peace of Christ was just overwhelming in your life. That you can open it up now. Feel free to share, because that just encourages all of us, right? Because if God can walk with you through that, He can walk with me when my storms come.
Exactly.
Now, at that point in your sermon, though, you transitioned, right? You said that when we become Christians, we have a new answer.
That's
to
right.
fill in that blank. What was that answer?
So came out of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and towards the end of the passage that we read, Paul makes a statement that for anyone who is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come, or the old has passed away. And so it's just this idea of like when you find your identity in Jesus, again, that idea of finding your identity in the resurrection and in the grace of God, and then this statement that like you are new. Like those who find their identity in Jesus are new. And so for those who believe and trust and follow Jesus, like when we fill in that blank, I am blank, we just say, I am new. It's just such a powerful idea that like, even Paul served as a great example for us on this Sunday, like a man who devoted his life to destroying what Jesus had given his life to build. And then when he meets the resurrected Jesus and experiences the grace of God, everything changes. And so his past doesn't define him. He can say, I am new. I'm not defined by my past. I'm not defined by what I've done in the past. And so just this beautiful idea of like, for those of us who trust and follow Jesus, like we can say, I am new. My past doesn't define me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting too, because you look in Philippians where he talks about, I have the credentials, right? I have everything that would show that I was good, and it was nothing.
Yes.
Right? Once I understand who Jesus is and who I am in Jesus, totally separate, right? It was nothing but garbage. We wanted to ask you guys, in this concept of, the old has passed away, the new has come, that you are made new, how has that impacted your view of yourself, your view of your life, or just your life in general, as you, whether you became a Christian or as you grew into and are becoming more sanctified in Christ, how has that impacted your life? But I wanted to ask you, what are some implications or practical ways that this plays out in our life when we understand this idea?
Yeah, I think the most tangible ones that come to mind are some of those that we've already mentioned. Number one is that you don't have to be defined by your past. Yeah. We went through a lot of examples on Sunday of like how someone might fill in the blank. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm rich, I'm poor, I'm young, I'm old, like all these examples. But sometimes, we define who we are by what we do or what someone has done to us. Yes. And the reality and the beauty of this idea and the practical nature of it is that when we are new, those things don't define us. So I think that's a big piece. That's a big piece of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a cool element too, because when you think about who has the ability to define something, right? When you create it. Like if you're a creator, you have the ability to define what it is, right? And so while we will sometimes take labels that are given to us by other people, that they have no authority over that. And when we understand that our Creator has given us that new definition, our Creator who is the one who has the authority to do that, it's like a game changer,
Yeah.
you know, in how
Yeah.
we understand ourselves.
Well, and when too, I think another idea is when your identity is tied to your circumstances, then when things are good, things are good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when the stock market is going crazy and unemployment is crazy low and all of these things that you've been working at, you know, like when things are good, great. But when those come crashing down, then if your identity is tied to those things, like then so does your identity, you know? Or even if your identity is tied to a relationship, and that person leaves you or passes away or something, like it destroys you. But when you can say I'm new because I find my identity in Jesus, then circumstances, while they still aren't fun when they're bad, like doesn't mean that we're like, oh great, but we don't have to lose our identity. Like we know who we are.
We're still rooted in that. Yeah, no, totally. And especially in certain circumstances like today where it really is forcing us to, you know, maybe we didn't realize where our heart was going, but now we've realized, oh, we've been putting our identity in the wrong spot, that we can come back to this truth. Any last thoughts, Adam, coming out of this or as we move forward into this identity series?
Yeah, we're going to continue with this idea of I am blank and just filling in the blank each week with truth that the Bible teaches us about who we are, who God has created us to be, and how we can find a secure, rooted identity in Jesus, and then the practical ways that's going to work itself out.
Love it. Well, that's all we have for tonight.
Yeah.
Adam, thanks for joining us, and I just highly encourage you guys, jump along this next Sunday and join us as we continue this series. It's going to be awesome. You're not going to want to miss it. So.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, guys.